war, money, climate change. How are these three connected? As militaries worldwide receive more money, the use of fossil fuels and their emissions rise both with and without conflict. The increasing emissions produced by war, even during peacetime, contribute to climate change. It's not only bombs, fires, and oil spills that produce these harmful emissions, but also the manufacture, production, and transportation of weapons, open-air burn pits, loss of vegetation, and damaged infrastructure. And even without climate change in the picture, warfare is detrimental to humanity. I think we don't realize to what extent these emissions reach. The number of bombs fired by the US and Allied forces in the past 20 years has surpassed 337,000, for an average of 46 bombs per day. A B-2 stealth bomber carrying those explosives burns 4.28 gallons of jet fuel per mile. During the Gulf War in 1991, it is estimated that oil fires alone contributed to more than 2% of global fossil fuels emissions that year. Militaries also produce a big percentage of their emissions without conflict. For example, the US Department of Defense's 566,000 buildings, like training facilities and manufacturing plants, account for 40% of the Department of Defense's fossil fuel use. In fact, if we look at the US alone, the Department of Defense is the government's largest fossil fuel consumer, accounting for between 77 and 80% of all federal government energy consumption since 2001. And where does the Department of Defense get the money they use to be able to produce all those emissions? Taxes. In 2022, 12% of US citizen taxes were given to the Department of Defense. That equals about $767 billion. The money the Department of Defense gets is allowing them to produce weapons, ways to transport them, build more infrastructure, etc., which essentially jeopardize the climate and world peace. So, what can we do about this? Currently, each year, the government divides the tax dollars between all sectors. But what if they didn't? Instead of the government choosing what percentage of the money goes where, what if each citizen could choose for themselves? For example, I want 10% to go to education, 11% to health, 15% to Medicare, 3% to national defense. You get the idea, all adding up to 100% distributed in all sectors, obviously having climate change and the sectors that aggravate it in mind. It doesn't even have to be the 100% of your taxes that one has control over. We can start by choosing where a small amount of our taxes go, say for example, 5%. I did a survey that showed that US citizens, if they could choose where 5% of the taxes would go, almost half would choose education, training, employment, and social services, and no one chose national defense. If Americans could choose where their taxes would go instead of the government choosing every year, the Department of Defense would have less money, which would decrease the amount of weapons, bombs, vehicles, infrastructure they can produce, which would in turn reduce the amount of fossil fuels they consume and greenhouse gases that they emit. A step towards better climate and towards world peace. Not only that, but the solution would increase the amount of Americans paying taxes because they have more control over their money. It would also allow them to have a voice over what they think is more important to fund. So this solution would not only benefit climate health, but also societal standards for paying taxes. Handling money with climate change in mind, we can start taking small or large steps towards betterment. If we manage the flow of money in the world and change the relationship between money and the government, we can defund warfare and reduce climate change and injustice and bring peace to humans worldwide.